it's interesting that Timothy, sort of as he's wrapping up talking to Timothy, he starts talking about money. And I know that none of you really care about money. You hope you never have any money, and but he starts talking about money, and in fact, in this book, in this letter, is a quote that is always misquoted. You heard most people say it: "The love of money." Yeah, but that's not exact. That's not an exact quote. That's a misquote. Okay, is not the is can be. It's a root of all evil. It's not the root of all evil. Okay, but most people quote it that way. So we're going to think a little bit about money. We're going to think about it in a couple different ways because he is addressing leaders. Okay, again, this is Timothy is going to be a leader, and it's interesting to me that he throws in stuff about money to Timothy. Not that Timothy was wealthy. We don't know really that much about him, but in sort of a universal thing, money gets people in trouble all the time, and it gets people off the rails. And it's real interesting what people will do for money. So this is what people say they would do for money. Now check this out. 8% of the people would commit murder for $1 billion. Okay? 10% would enter into a sham marriage. You know what a sham marriage is? No, not a shotgun wedding. It's just, you're not really married. It's a pretend marriage. You're getting somebody from a foreign country who wants to get married, but you're not really going to get married. You're just pretending, right? For $100,000, they do it. So this is 10% of America, of the people, and these are pretty good stats too, because it was a wide ranged quiz they did. 15% of people would shoplift for $1,000. Okay? 10% would perform a sex act on a stranger for $100,000. Okay? 15% would fake their own death for $100 million. Because you get a lot of trouble if you fake your own death, because the only reason you fake your own death is for some nefarious reason or for life insurance. 10%, this is probably higher now with, fans only and stuff like that, but 10% would do amateur porn for $1 million, okay? 25% would donate sperm or eggs without their partner's knowledge for $100 million, okay? 10% would punch a stranger in the face for $1 million. And 20% would flash a stranger for just a mere $10,000. Now, actually, I believe these numbers are all wrong. And here's why. I got in a lot of trouble for this at a big conference, but I was speaking to a bunch of kids who, when you talk about money and what you do for money and stuff like that, most everybody goes, I'd never do that. You look at this and you go, man, no way. I wouldn't do that. You could keep going with the zeros, and I'd never do that. But most people don't really know themselves. And so at this conference, I said, I was talking about how all of us have a price. We all can be bought. We just don't think we can be bought. And we will oftentimes do things that are super disgusting that we would never imagine we'd do if the situation, the conditions, the price was right. And everybody's going, yeah. And so I go, I'm going to give you an example. And I had shoes and socks on. I kicked off my shoes. I pulled my sock off. And I go, I would like somebody to suck my toe. Any takers? And not in a real sensual way, just, real quick, So it was a clean, it was a clean toe. You see why I got in trouble with this, right? And it was I said, it's a clean toe, washed today, it's been hiding in a sock, it's totally fine. But I'm just in the mood to have that toe kind of sucked a little bit. And now, how many of you would volunteer to do that? Nobody's going to volunteer. And I go, so okay, I'll tell you what. I know this isn't something you would normally want to do, but for $5. How about for $5?
How old were you at the time?
How old was I? It was about 8 years ago, okay? And I said, yeah, it's an old guy's toe, but it's clean. And I had maybe 200 middle school kids in the room. Guess how much I had? Guess how high I had to go to before somebody would suck my toe? $12. And so I'm on the stage, I stick my toe out, the kid runs up, real quick, just like, and of course, every camera in the room comes out, right?
Keep looking at me.
Get away, I know you will. You do it for $1.95. The Jewish is coming out of you really fast. Okay, so he and I mess with this all the time. Okay. And of course, everybody's super disgusted, right? They're taking a picture of this kid. But here was the deal. And they all knew this. I said, you know what? You think this guy's really disgusting because for $12 he did something that's kind of gross, you know? I said, but every single one of you has a price. And all I got to do is keep going up and up. And I wouldn't have to go very far. And you'd be in line to suck on that toe, you know? And they all knew that it was true. And by the way, everyone in this room, I wouldn't have to go very high if I played that game. I actually had, you knew I had a stack of money there. I'm going, 10 grand to suck the toe. Probably, you know, I'd buy you a new car. How many of you would do it for 10 grand? Yeah, see? How many do it for less? Yeah, I know, okay. But pretty much, okay, how about this? 100 grand. How many of you would do it for 100 grand? All right, pretty much you would too.
If you do all 10 toes,
yeah. Here's and the point of this was that money does a funny thing. It can make you do stuff you would never imagine you would do. Because everybody walked in there with their little moral high ground, and I would never, and all of a sudden for $12, some guys, that's okay, I'll do that. And then we all realize that a lot of times, all it takes it's not if, it's when. Okay. So and this actually happened to me too.
That's a really realistic.
What? Yeah. There's a forest fire coming towards your house. Think of your home. You have 15 minutes to gather whatever is important to you and put them in your car. What do you take? Think about it for a few minutes. Jot a couple things down if you need to write it down. But what would you take? You can only get it in your car. Okay? You got 15 minutes to get everything out of your house and in your car. What would you take?
It's a long time.
It is a long time.
Does this include people or no?
Well, if you have a little child there, I think it would include that person, or an animal. Okay. I'm looking for a list here, so. Have you done this before?
I live in California, so I made this list a lot.
Okay. Okay. Why don't you start? What's on your list?
Okay, people first.
Okay.
My backpack next, which has everything that like my ID and my wallet, anything
Okay.
that's really
Identifies you.
document-wise,
Okay.
whatever. And my instruments,
Okay. Your piano.
no,
Okay.
portable instruments.
Okay.
That's pretty much it. I'm out of there.
Okay. No clothes.
I mean, I have an outfit in my backpack.
Okay. You come prepared, don't you? Ready to go. Anybody else? Just throw me what's on your list? And by the way, there's no right or wrong to this, but it's interesting. Yeah.
Obviously people first, then my dogs, my memory box, and my Bible.
What's in your memory box?
Just like pictures and knickknacks I've got from people over the years that are just special to me.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
When we had to evacuate my house, I grabbed my family.
So you've done this.
Yeah.
Okay.
My family, my Bible, and then got my guinea pig and my tat in that order. And then just some food and I tried to grab my ID and birth certificate.
Okay.
Social security.
It's kind of the stuff that's in your backpack. Prove who you are and stuff like that. All right. Yeah.
I'd start with family. Then I'd go guns, mounts, important documents.
Okay. No.
Mounts.
Mounts. The head. Yeah, he'd be the guy driving around town with his giant moose head in the back of his. Yeah. Forget the dog. Save the moose head. You know. Okay. A mount is, it's animals. It's in the man cave. It's in his man cave. Girls aren't allowed in there because living room. Yeah. Somebody else. What would you take? Yeah.
My family and then my cat.
Okay.
How many guitars?
I'd fit as many as I can, as many guitars as I possibly
Yeah.
can. My Bible and probably my phone because I like all my IDs.
Okay.
And
Apparently none of you have computers. You don't take your computers with you. Yeah, your phones, everything's on there that you need, right? It's interesting. I mean, we go around the room and get all this, but what's interesting is the things that are of value to you, when your house is going to burn down. And when you think that's it, what you go collect. And a lot of times, yeah, you'll collect stuff that proves who you are or, you need for communication or something like that. But a lot of the other stuff you take are the things that you value most. And some of those have no financial, they're not tangibly financial, like your memory box. Who had the memory box? Yeah, your memory box. I'm sorry, but there's probably nothing there I want to pay money for. There's nothing in there I'd look and go, I just go, hey, burn that thing, But for you, that's super important, okay? Because it's something that can't be replaced. And most everything else we let burn because it can be replaced. But it tells us a little bit about values. And when people when they put emphasis on the wrong value, it twists stuff up, right? And you don't know what your real values are till something like that happens to you. Remember Ken McCoy that was here a couple weeks ago? Okay. I was in his house when we got the call. I was visiting him when we got the call. He got the call. He had 15 minutes to evacuate. And he had one car, and I had my rental car. And I watched them. Because I had nothing, I had everything in a little rolly. I just threw it in the car. And I watched he and his wife run around the house and try to determine what was of value. And I remember I pretty much had his whole life in my car. He put his computer and stuff like that. His photo albums in my car, and so I know you guys, your photos are all in your phone, but because you're an older guy, you had photo albums and stuff. And then I saw him. He had a whole wall of really cool guitars, really expensive guitars. And he took a couple of them, and then he took this old beater guitar, and he put it in, and it was because he made it, right? Because I asked him, why did you do that? Because I made it. But it was interesting to watch the values that people have and what they do, the things that they can't replace, okay? So as we talk about money, we're talking about values and what is really worth something and what isn't worth something, and why some people, when they put their emphasis on things that isn't really worth it, it oftentimes turns out badly for them. So here's what Timothy says. Godliness with contentment is a great gain. Godliness with contentment. What's contentment? Can you define contentment for me? How would you put it when you hear the word contentment, what's that mean to you? Okay, satisfaction. Okay. Being okay with things, yeah.
And you don't need to ask for more.
Yeah, you don't need to ask for more. This is enough. This is fine. I'm okay. It's good. I'm not grasping for more. I'm not wishing for more. I'm good. Godliness with I'm good is great gain. The attitude that this is fine. If I got to live in this tent, that's fine. If I got to eat hot dogs, that's fine. Yeah.
Can you be content and still want more?
No, not if, you can still be open to getting more, but to just start to desire more, you've lost your contentment. Okay? And a lot of us a lot of us live in a state of constant desire. We're always wanting something a little better. We get a car, man. We're real happy when we first get the car. And then a couple years down the road, man, I want to get rid of this car. I want something better. And in fact, the whole process of how most people live their life is always trying to get a little bit more, move up the ladder, whatever it is, get a little more status, have another one of these, you know. And then Paul writes, and you've all heard this before, but we brought nothing into the world. We're not going to take anything out of it. And one of the more interesting things is when I used to take kids to Mexico in Tijuana, there was a group of people that lived on the edge of the dump. And in fact, when we go down here with our guys from KCF, we always go to the dump because there's a community there and people dig through the trash, other people's trash, to get recyclables. And little kids, their arms are all black and stuff like that. But next to the old dump in Tijuana was also a cemetery. Okay, was also a cemetery. And what I would take my high school kids down there and I go, okay, catch the view here. Everything you have, all the stuff that you're going to work your whole life to collect and you're going to value is someday going to end up there where all those little kids are digging through. All of our stuff sooner or later ends up in the dump. And all of us sooner or later end up over there in the cemetery. And when those two things are right next to each other, it's kind of like, whoa. That's how things end up. And that's exactly what Paul is saying here. He's going, brought nothing in, taken nothing out. But if we have food and clothing, well, we'll be content with that. Another version says food and shelter. And those who want to get rich, well, they fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So let's consider what should a Christian's relationship with money be like?
More giving than taking.
Okay, more giving than taking. Or should we have a different relationship with money than the average person? Yeah.
To realize that you're just a steward and pretend it's God's money.
Okay? Yeah.
Instead of how much do I give, how much do I need?
Okay?
I think like what you said, my question is I'm open to it, but I'm not chasing it.
Okay? So you hear those responses. That's a Christian worldview of money. It's how much do I, not how much do I want, how much do I need? I mean, where else do you find people who are willing to put the brakes on the accumulation of money and stuff? I've never met anybody willing to do that except for some guys who are in some weird mysticism thing, and they didn't do it for long. But most people are always trying to get more, accumulate more, bigger house, nicer car, more of this, more of that, fly first class rather than second class, all that kind of stuff. And only in the Christian worldview do we begin to look at it from a whole different vantage point, that we're stewards of money. A steward means you don't belong, that money doesn't belong to you. In our context, it belongs to God. He's the one who gives, and he puts it in our hands to do with it his work. In fact, the reason you are on earth today, the reason when you became a Christian, suddenly you just didn't disappear, is that God left you and I here to do the things here that can't be done in heaven. There will be no starving people in heaven. Okay? There will be no people that are hurting in heaven that are going to need us to sit next to them and just let them cry on our shoulder. There are going to be nobody with disease in heaven that we're going to be tending to. Okay? There's going to be nobody that needs to hear the gospel in heaven. We're here to do the things that you cannot do in heaven. And part of the tools that he gives us is the resources that we have. And for us as Americans and Canadians, for us, we have the most resources of anybody in the world. And so the heavy thing is that this is put in your lap. not for you to get, oh, I can make it bigger and better and nicer and, spend more on me. But it's put to you in your lap to be a steward. And whether you're going to be a steward, where you're going to say, you know what, I don't need any more. I'm fine with this. And then take that and use it as a tool to help advance the kingdom. That's our relationship with money. At least that's how it ought to be like. Is there a point where having too much in the way of things and cash is wrong? No? Okay. I hear a yes, I hear a no. Okay? If so, is there a point? If you think there is there a point where you just go, you know what?
Well, it's not the amount. It's the mindset of it.
Okay, so then the answer is not having too much is not wrong. Okay? Right? Okay. It's what you do with the too much that you have.
Or the desire to gain.
To get too much. Okay? So it's never been that Christians ought not be rich. The church, by the way, had a number of people that had resources. And when you read the book of Acts, you find some people had resources. But you remember the beginning of the book of Acts? And by the way, this was not prescriptive. This was responsive. Do you remember that some people had more than one house in the book of Acts? Do you remember what they did? Or they had house and land. Do you remember what they did? They had extra stuff. What? Yeah, they brought it. They actually brought it to the disciples and said, "We don't need this land. We're going to sell this off and get money." And remember Ananias and Sapphira? They were going to play that game, except they grabbed a pile for themselves and said, "Well, we can use this." And they presented it as if they were the guys giving it all when they weren't. And they got fried for that one. So it's not like it's not the amount, it's what we do with what we're given. So if you won $500 million a day in a lottery, okay, what would you do with it? I want you to think about yourself, the things that you're passionate about, okay? And even think practically. You're between 18 and 29 years, or you're 30 now, aren't you? 31. Oh, sorry, okay. Old man. In your space in life, if you got $500 million, and I do want you to write this down or get something to write on, I want you to write down how you would spend that. $500 million in the lottery, what would you do with it? You can say, I'd spend X amount of dollars on a house. I'd spend X amount of dollars on a car. I'd spend X amount of dollars on this, on that.
Is this like a real situation where you like tax and stuff?
Tax?
Yeah.
Your taxes are done. So you got $500 left, $500 million after taxes. Okay. I'm presuming you're sort of writing these in the list of priorities for you. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're just writing the first thing that comes to your head. But I assume they're more or less usually the first thing that comes to your head is one of the priorities. Take another minute or so and jot down anything else you can think of. 500 million. Doesn't go that far today. Buy 5 houses on Kauai, you've spent that. Or 2 houses, depending where you buy them. Or if you're in Kukuyula, you can't even buy a house for $5 million there. So. Drew Brees' house was sold for $7-something million. I'd like to have him in here doing that, by the way, since he's a Christian guy. Okay, so somebody bring me some of your list, on your list. Yeah.
I probably wouldn't do this, but I'd like to think that I would do this.
And by the way, yeah, we're all presenting the best of ourselves here, right? We're because you realize I might ask you to do this, so you probably start off, I'm tithing first, but that's probably a lie. But go ahead.
I put buy the things that are a necessity and then hopefully put the rest towards a project that I support. Like, if this wasn't being built and I was given the money, I'd probably put money towards the Acre House or
Okay.
something like that.
Okay.
That's what I'd like to think.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah.
Well, I consider it. It's funny you bring this up because I was thinking about this last night, and I don't think I could take 500 million and put it to the best use just by myself. So I would try and find a group of people that I trust and I love, and I would try and give a portion of that to each of them so they could go further the kingdom with that. And then, of course, because I'm selfish, I would save some for myself and live more comfortably.
Okay.
Next car.
Nice car. All right. That's all on your list, huh? That's an expensive car. Oh, okay. Anything else on that list? A house. Okay. I mean, I'm surprised, that you guys. Well, let's get a few more.
I do like a house first, and then probably support my dad's school in some way, my brothers, sisters, family, and then like maybe start a gym after that. Maybe
Okay.
Ministry or something like that.
Okay.
So, gotta be all holy and that stuff, just put tithe, and then support family, and then probably like kind of Colby's route, but like more on the selfish side, hire somebody to teach you how to use money, because most people that win the lottery like blow all their money.
Yeah. I mean, the stories of that are nuts.
So,
How to script your life real fast is to win the lottery. Yeah.
yeah, so spend some money on getting people around you who know how to use money, just learn how to actually not blow it,
Okay.
and then do what they tell you, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I said I'd want to like give like half to like church slash like organizations like research, like cancer research and stuff, and then with the other half, I'd probably like I'd split half of it and put that into the stock market and just like try and keep that invested, just like try and
Okay.
gain more wealth so I can continue to use that, and the rest, yeah, like everyone said, just like live more comfortably, maybe buy a yacht.
Yeah. Here's a question. Anybody else? Yeah.
I put buy a house in a pretty place, furnish the house, go to Europe for summer, and then that's pretty much my wish list. Support missionaries long term and give to those in need long term. Like not just give it all at once, but like support someone continually.
So if you had $500 million, how many of you would go out and get a job? And you still get a job, huh? You start your own job? No, I mean, you don't need to work. If you have that much money, you can put it, you could invest it, like what you said, and every month you'd be drawing dividends, and you don't need to work. Okay? It's interesting, even if you knew you had $500 million, it means you never have to work again in your life. A lot of you would still say, I would work, because what would you do all day long? Except count your pennies and uncount them, Now, you're not going to have $500 million probably, although some of you may end up like that. Or if inflation goes, you might all have it by next week. But it's interesting to see what our priorities are. And there would be nothing wrong with buying a house. Maybe the question is, how much would you spend on the house? The question isn't needs. The question is excessive needs. And frankly, it's really hard for us to know when we've crossed that line. If you go to a third world country, you spend about a month in a third world country, and you come back and you walk into your own house and you go, we excess on everything, right? If you've ever done that. Well, look all the stuff we have. We're throwing stuff away, and because you're going to somebody's house in a third world country and they got a little frying pan, and that's about it, and a charcoal, little coal stove. and we come back to wild excesses. And it doesn't always make sense for us to say, well, I got to live like a third world person and give everything away, because we have to be able to live in community. There was Francis Chan. You know who Francis Chan is? I heard Francis Chan. So at one point, Francis Chan, he's decided that he was going to live financially different than the rest of the world. And so he sold his car, and his idea was, and by the way, they lived in a suburb. And so to go to the grocery store, his wife had to walk down to the corner, get on a bus, go to the grocery store, buy groceries only enough that she could actually carry them and put them back on the bus, and then walk back to doing that. And that sounds really good, to live simple like that, but it was a real pain in the butt. It took her 10 times as long to go to the grocery store. And of course, Francis, because he speaks a lot, he had to go to the airport. Now, how do you go to the airport without a car? Well, you know what he did? He called a friend and says, can you take me to the airport? So he really wasn't getting rid of his money, he wasn't really simplifying his lifestyle. He was just making other people's lifestyle more complex and using their resources, right? It's not easy. You like that, don't you? It's not easy to do that kind of thing, to simplify your lifestyle. And we have to live in context with the world that we live in. But it doesn't mean we have to live in excess. We can make different kinds of decisions. So, with people starving all over the world, can you justify having a $100,000 car?
You tithe 10% of your income, and you have money to buy a car.
But can you still justify it? How many of you think you can justify it? How many think you cannot justify it? How many don't want to say? Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
I think you can justify anything. I don't know if you can rightly justify.
Well, that justify, I'm talking about rightly justify. That God would go, yeah, that was a good decision, That you feel comfortable, you don't feel any pangs of guilt by buying a $100,000 car. Now, if you need it for business, I've seen $100,000 trucks. They're all tricked out with certain things because they're a business tool. That's a different story, right? But if it's just your personal car going to the grocery store and back, do you really need that Lamborghini? So, and again, this point of this isn't to sit and judge what other Christians do, but the point is that we begin to make decisions, even right where you're at, that, at a certain point, I'm going to live in a different cadence. Even if something happens and our business, our record, or whatever it is, puts us in that stratosphere of uber wealthy people, we're still going to choose to live in a certain way. How does chasing the dollar make trouble for our Christian faith? Hypocrites.
It makes money your idol.
Yeah, it makes money your idol. That's where your focus is. Yeah.
It kind of draws our trust away from God, because if we start chasing after money and then we don't have enough money for bills and everything, then we aren't relying on God to take care of our needs. We're relying on ourselves to make more money to take care of our needs.
Have any of you guys in your family ever got together and your parents said, we just don't have enough to make rent, or we don't have enough food money? We're going to have to pray it in. Has that ever happened to any of your families? Okay.
Not that extreme, but we're not spending anything extra.
Okay. Ever heard of a guy named George Mueller?
Yes.
Okay. George Mueller, he was a guy who started orphanages in England during the Industrial Revolution, when there's a bunch of little orphans on the street and nobody taking care of them. George Mueller, he took his first job in a church, and as I think I've told you guys before, in the old days, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the way churches financed themselves is they would rent pews, and so the seats, your family would rent, say, this block of seats, and if it was close to the front, like you guys are, it costs more. If you're back in nosebleed, it costs less, right? And then, Yeah. And then way up on top would be a section for people that were it was called the pauper seat. That's where they'd sit when they had no money at all. So they get to come to church, but the church made their money by renting pews from most expensive, and nobody could sit in your pew. If your family was out of town, no, that's because that's their family pew. And Mueller came in and he thought that system sucked. He said, we ought to be depending, not raising money like this. God will provide the money, and God's people have money, and they will give in order to do the things that the church needs to do, including his own salary. We found out real fast that when people didn't have to pay anything for their pews, they didn't give anything at all. And on Sunday morning, there was a box in the back you could put money, and you would go back and lift it up, and there'd just be a nickel or a dime, British equivalent, in that box. And he had a family to feed. And so what he would do is he'd go home and tell his wife, we have no money for food. And she says, well, you need to ask the church to give. He says, they understand. He said, we're going to ask somebody better than the church. So they would get down and pray. And when you read his biography, all kinds of crazy stuff happened. They would get done praying, and there'd be one rap on the door of his back door of his house, and he'd go look outside, and there's a big box of food, and right to the nick of time, every time he took his needs to God, God provided for him, and he ended up starting an orphanage that never asked for money. They never sent out a brochure. They never did any advertising. Whenever they started running low on stuff, he'd gather the whole staff, and they'd start praying for it. And God would suddenly move on people's heart. Now, they were doing stuff good. It was obvious what they were doing, but he never asked for money. And God met him where he was at and always provided for his needs. Not always his wants, but always his needs. So that's more the Christian model than chasing after it and focusing on it. Hey, when we have it, we'll thank God for it. When we don't, we'll ask him for the stuff that we actually need, not the stuff that we might want. All right? Okay. What would it take for you to be content? Remember what Paul said, content and godliness. That's what we're really aiming at. What would it take for you in your life to be content? I just want you to think about that. Do you need to own a house? Would that make, and especially some of you ladies, would owning a house make you feel more secure than just renting a house? Or would you be okay with renting a house? Does it need to be a big house? Do you have to have more than one car? Having a car and not having a car would make it a severe hardship. Would you be content with one car? What would it take for you to be content? Would you be content not being able to take extravagant vacations? Having a certain dollar amount, having to save money for 2 or 3 years before you could make any big expenditures. Would you be content with that? And we're the only ones that really know that, and you'll know that more as you get older, because all of a sudden you'll be going, wow, we need to make some more money here because we want to, and you got your big list going out. And again, what God wants to call us back to is being content with him. Just being content with him and content with what he gives us, and going, it's okay. It's totally okay. So, we've talked a little bit about this. Paul's mentioned this to the church. When we get back together again, we're going to be looking. We've got one or two more journeys with Timothy here, but he lays it pretty much out. And I find it really ironic that although he mentions this, within about 300 years of him writing this, the guys running the church had a ton of bucks. They had, a ton of gold. They had the finest clothes and all that kind of stuff. And they somehow now forgot about that, and money became one of the driving forces of the medieval church. So much so that there was a guy named Martin Luther goes, this sucks. And he started the thing called the Protestant Reformation, which is all of you are part of, you know? Because Christians sometimes lose focus on some of these really simple things. But it's important where you're at in life to be going, okay, this is how I'm going to live. I'm going to live simply. I'm not going to live like I'm a pauper, but I'm going to be content. If I never get a new car in my life, that's fine. I'll be just happy with a car that'll get me from point A to point B, you know? If I have to rent the rest of my life, that's fine, you know? If I'm never able to own anything, that's fine. I can be content with that because my contentment isn't in the accumulation of stuff. It's in something else. Any thoughts? Any questions? All right, let's pray. Father, just thank you for the fact that we do live in an affluent world where we have more than enough. We have the luxury to throw away stuff that other people would find really valuable. Make us mindful of what we have. Make us not greedy help us not to be greedy for more. Help us be content in you and listening to you as stewards of the money and the opportunities that you give us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, guys. Oh, you can put the money in the jar right here? No, I'm just kidding.